I would like to share this rather amazing story about my great-grandparents, especially my great-grandmother, Ethel May Waters Schmidt. The year was 1903. She and her future husband, Benjamin Schmidt, had met and decided they would get married, and they began to make the plans. Now remember, this was the days before cars or electricity, anything like that. And they knew that wherever they were going to go, they would have to go in the horse and wagon or buggy or whatever. Anyway, it was going to be early October, and they could, wherever they would go, they would likely perhaps get into snow. Even that early in the year had been a cool year. Anyway, they decided on the 11th of October of 1903 and made their plans, and they were married. But before that, her grandfather, they were very close, each of them were close to their grandparents. Anyway, Charles Waters had asked if maybe he could be part of their honeymoon trip, which seems rather amazing to me, but that's what he was doing. He knew the winter was closing in, and he was a miner, and he wanted to see if he could find more gold or silver or whatever they were looking for before the winter would set in and the season would be done. So they agreed that he and a companion, not the grandmother, but the other man he was working with, mining, could accompany them after they left from South Idaho on their honeymoon. They had tents they would sleep in, and Ben and Ethel would have their own private tent since it was their honeymoon. So I think that's rather amazing that Ethel decided that it would be okay to have her grandfather come along and maybe her father on the wedding trip and the honeymoon trip. But they did. And so they got out and they're heading towards Colorado. Now that was a long ways, even nowadays. But back then they were going by horse and wagon and buggy, and the weather was pretty cold. But they continued. They got into the early mountains of Colorado, and then the weather just broke loose as far as snowstorms. They had been married about 3 or 4 days, and Ethel said that she was nothing but cold and wet at this point. And so she said she wrote that they went to their bed, tried to snuggle down in their sleeping bags, and when they woke up in the morning, there was 1.5 feet of snow weighing down the top of their tents. And she said that sort of was the end of it for her. So when they awakened, she told Ben that she was tired of this and they could do their honeymoon some other time. And he agreed with that. And so they broke the news to her father, grandfather, all those were traveling with him. And they agreed that they ought to go back, since it was probably pretty hard on Ethel during this time. So they separated ways. The other family went on to do, family and friends went on to do some more mining, which they soon left that as well. But Ethel May said that was the hardest trip she had ever been on, and it had to be her honeymoon. So I think that was pretty generous of her to agree to let anybody else go on their honeymoon trip with them. But it all worked out for them, and their marriage lasted for quite a few years, and only because she passed away, not because they divorced. Anyway, it was just an interesting honeymoon trip. It shows that she really did have a generous part of her that sometimes we forget, and we look at her, what we think was her sharpness later in life. Anyway, you have to love her for that. The end.